again to our hello everyone, welcome to our third session this evening for EAD, diving into theme number 2. It's lovely to see so many of you here. We have more people popping in. We always know that 1 or 2 minutes as people are trying to find the link and jump on. I'm going to go ahead and put our landing site in the chat, and Patricia, my amazing colleague, already beat me to it. So in the chat, you'll find our landing page for today. Those of you who have been with us before know that's where we'll engage throughout the session, really make sure that we're giving the opportunity to stop, process, do some thinking. We will not be talking at you for the entire hour and a half, and I know our time will fly. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just so that we can get going today. Okay, so as you look at our screen today, you are here, if you're here for today's session, you're looking at exploring how communities shape the land and how land shapes communities. And we're really excited to have you back. For those of you who are returning, we're excited to have you back. For those of you who are new to today's conversation, we're really excited to have you join us today. In all of our sessions, we have a landing page that we use for our interaction and for conversations. So you'll see that right there for today's conversation and today's landing page. You'll see that you'll have the slides on top as you scroll down. An opportunity to, we're talking about maps. I am secretly a map nerd, not so secret, but there's a map there. Go ahead and add yourself to our map. I think it's always wonderful to see where people are coming from as they're joining in our conversation and to see how our community is growing. So when you look at the locations that are currently on the map, all of those locations represent someone who has joined our session previously. So what you're going to do is go ahead and you're going to click on the plus sign and then just add your location. If you are back again for another visit, when you add your location, go ahead and change the color of your pinpoint so that we can continue to see how many of us are coming back again and again and again. So we're super excited for that. Then right below that, you'll also find an opportunity to introduce yourself. Now you'll see that we do definitely lean heavy on Padlets compared to the chat, partly because when we start going in the chat, we all know what happens. The chat starts flying, then you can't even read it. So that's part of the reason why we use Padlets. For the Padlet, same thing, click on the plus sign and you are going to be able to let us know about yourself. And you'll see with our discussion today, as we're talking about changing landscapes, really thinking about how have you integrated maps and concepts of changing landscape into your teaching in the past? So you can go ahead and add yourself there. And for those of you who are returning today, you actually have a bonus question. If you're returning today, let us know, have you been using EAD? How have you been using it to influence your planning and your instruction? And let us know what your current thinking is. Okay, so that, and I see more people are just kind of popping in as we go along. So those of you who are just joining us, welcome. Just doing the walkthrough of our landing page for today. We're so excited that you could join us. We're going to have a great conversation. Really excited. And my colleagues, Michael and Patricia, are going to be dropping links into the chat. So our landing page, if you're just joining us, is right in the chat. You're going to click on that and you'll have access to all of these places to share your thoughts, ideas, and to introduce yourself. And while you are doing that, I'm going to go ahead and head back to our slides and continue our conversation for today. This is the great thing about Padlet. It stays there. You can keep adding, you can read who's in the room and just seeing who's here, seeing who's joining us this evening, where they're coming from, and sharing your thoughts and ideas. That's the wonderful thing here. It'll be there. I'll continue on with the slides and you can still continue to share your thoughts and ideas. So as I go back to our slides today, those of you who need documentation of your participation in the webinar today, when we finish the webinar tomorrow, Friday, we will go through, we'll look at completion of Padlets, and we'll also look at exit tickets. And then we'll send you a communication out, in a letter that has documentation of your participation. So make sure that you are completing those throughout the session today. And at the end of the session, there'll also be an exit ticket. That exit ticket is super important because we ask for your name, your email, and those details that we can personalize your document with. Also, if you like using social media, make sure that you have followed our EAD roadmap. And during today's session, use the hashtag EAD roadmap to share anything that you're finding really interesting and really engaging in today's conversation, which I'm sure is going to be absolutely amazing. We have an amazing educator and we have an amazing organization with us today. We have the Leventhal Map and Education Center with Michelle LeBlanc here today. And then we have Ashlyn Crossfield, who is going to be sharing her experience with Boston Public Schools. So we're very excited for that today. I'll give them a little more formal introduction later on. I'll let you kind of sit in anticipation and as we continue on today. So those of you, let me rearrange my screen. There we go. For those of you who are brand new today to EAD in general, I'll do my usual just quick overview. And since some of you are new, we'll just do a quick review. And if you need more of the foundational pieces, you can definitely go back and watch the recording from session 1 or session 2 that'll talk about kind of being an EAD teacher and the EAD overview, as well as that first theme, civic participation. And as we know, our EAD initiative was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Department of Education, and it was led by Circle, iCivics, the Edmund J. Safra Center of Ethics, School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University, and the Jonathan Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. And along with those experts in the field, one of the aspects that makes the EAD roadmap absolutely amazing, as we know, is the contribution from over 300 different educators, historians, political scientists, really coming together to make this framework as strong as possible. So when we think about the roadmap, the EAD roadmap is an inquiry-based content framework that really provides guidance for excellence in civics and history education for all learners. Yet, since the roadmap is a framework and not a curriculum or a mandate, it provides states and districts the flexibility to use the roadmap to deliver excellent history and civic learning. Really leads into essential questions and discussions around topics like reflective patriotism. The other very important aspects of the roadmap is it really encourages a telling of America's plural yet shared story through a more complete and honest accounting of the past, both the good and the bad. So in just a moment, we're going to dive into one of the themes today and really think about how it's organized across K-12. Now, within the EAD roadmap, within the EAD initiative, there are 3 core documents that are really essential to just be aware of. And all of these resources are available on our website. You can go continue and explore them later. But we have our EAD report, which contains the theory and rationale and approach to the roadmap. Then you have the EAD roadmap itself, which contains 7 themes across 4 grade levels. And finally, you have the Pedagogy Companion, which describes the 6 pedagogical core principles. So today, as we dive into just getting more familiar with the roadmap structure, we're going to focus on theme number 2, our changing landscape, where we'll explore the connection between physical place and thinking about our communities. Now, as a reminder, I know we've seen this graphic a lot, but as a reminder, just making sure that we continue to think about the EAD roadmap in terms of having this system of inquiry that gradually gets more focused, where we start with these big and broad design challenges, really focused on the dilemmas and history and civic content, then getting more focused in content themes, where we're addressing those big ideas in history and civics. And then finally, we get into those driving questions and those sample guiding questions. Now, these pieces get more focus and are available across K-12, which is absolutely essential. Now, as we think about our 5 design challenges, now these design challenges really encourage educators to lean into that tension that arises in history and civic instruction. We know lots of times we come upon topics and ideas and we can, I'll talk about that later. But what these design challenges are actually doing are actually pulling us into the conversation rather than shying away from these challenging topics. And today we're going to be diving into design challenge number 2, America's plural yet shared story, which I'm not gonna lie, is totally one of my favorites. When we think about, we're going to enable that live transcription. So as we think about that, really, I will, as we dive into the next slide, thinking about design challenge number 2. Again, if you are unfamiliar with the other design challenges, that's not a problem. On our website, you can go through and really dive into each individual design challenge. Now, when we look at design challenge number 2, America's plural yet shared stories, it really helps us focus on the importance of integrating the perspectives of Americans from all backgrounds. And I think that's one of the reasons that I personally love this design challenge, because I think of what happens in our classrooms. So I was a former elementary teacher, and think about what happens in our classrooms. We're trying to incorporate all of the different perspectives into our conversations. And as we're trying to explain that full narrative of history, thinking about how we're getting these different perspectives into the story and into the conversation. And one of the challenges that we see, especially with that second question there, how can we do so consistently across all historical periods and conceptual content? So when we think about this, I think this is something that really pushes us in design challenge number 2, not just talking about this in the past or in the present, but really constantly looking through all of these perspectives throughout all of these different time periods. And finally, as we think about those 7 themes, as I mentioned before, alongside those design challenges, those 5 design challenges, we have these 7 themes. Now, these 7 themes help you rethink and reprioritize what really goes into your curriculum, allowing you to develop an educational plan that holistically teaches the full complexity of American history and civics in a way that more deeply engages your local student population. So when we think about the roadmap, we have 7 themes, which are then built across 4 grade bands. Sorry about that. I get too excited. I start going really fast. But we have those 7 themes. And within each of those themes, we see 4 grade bands that gradually dive deeper into concepts by anchoring each theme with both a history and a civics thematic question. And as we think about these different elements, we see how the understanding gradually deepens over time. And as we dive deeper here into theme number 2, you'll see some of the characteristics there of both our thematic questions and our key concepts. But if you want to explore some of the other themes, definitely go to the website and you'll be able to access those. So as we explore theme number 2, our changing landscape, we see how our history thematic questions allow us to explore how our geographic, social, economic, and political landscape has really changed over time, where then we have our civics thematic questions, which really challenge us to analyze the cost and benefits of those changes. And those thematic questions actually cut across K-12. So those thematic questions are big and broad, and then we dive into those key concepts which then start to divide into K-5 and 6-12. And as we see these key concepts, we see concepts like understanding Indigenous histories and connections to the land, community connections to the land, and how that then bridges into 6-12, where students are then analyzing Indigenous understandings of land stewardship, economic activity, property, and prosperity. And we see that same spiral and that same vertical alignment where in K-5, our students are examining how land and people shape each other, which then builds into analyzing the impact of people, policy, and cultural norms on landscape and climate. So we see that direct connection, and we see the foundation that we can develop in K-5 and how that builds into 6-12. So as we look across some of these questions, so the questions that I'm showing you here are going to be your driving questions. Now, these questions you could use to help develop a unit. They're much higher than just an individual lesson plan, because as you hear some of these, you can think about There's so many different directions that we could take that into. So in K2, with our changing landscape, as we see our youngest learners really diving into what is community? How do communities change? And where that gradually progresses into, why should we learn about the history of the land that we inhabit? How does the environment impact my life and community? In the 6-8, how do borders change over time and why? What gives societies their identities? And then finally in 9-12, how have different groups of Americans taken responsibility for the landscape of the United States? So we see how these questions gradually become more complex over time. And this is an amazing way to see the foundational skills and content knowledge that we can have our students really grapple with, and how we can continue to build on that over time. Now, I've been talking to you for way too many minutes all at once. What I'd love for you to do is stop, go back to our landing site for today, and really think about, how can the EAD roadmap deepen student learning around the importance of integrating the perspectives of Americans from all different backgrounds when narrating our history. So think about that design challenge number 2, America's plural yet shared story. And then theme number 2, our changing landscapes. So those of you who are just joining us, back on our landing site, as that link is in the chat, and Patricia put the link directly to our Padlet as well. As we scroll down, you're going to go to our second pause point and just take a moment and think about, where do you see the opportunity for EAD to really deepen that learning? And this is the joy of virtual PDs, of actually giving you a moment to stop, think, take a moment to reflect. And those of you who are just joining us who do not know how to add your thoughts onto Padlet, you're just going to click on the plus sign in the bottom right-hand corner, and that will give you a space to write. And as we're giving you some time to think and process, and I will go back to, I'm going to go back to our slides here and just click back to one. I know sometimes it's good to have some of those driving questions and be able to look at them in a little more depth. In our sessions, we move at rocket speed. So thinking about community and how it analyzes and encourages deep thinking, the influences of different groups and cultures on different regions and areas. Okay, having open conversations about events that have happened in the past and thinking about their relationship to the present. There's that, I love seeing that toggling right there happening between the past and the present. That's wonderful. Okay, thinking about what makes up America. Okay, when we say America, what do we mean as we think of the people and the land? And we're going to take a closer look at that today in just a moment. So as you're capturing your thoughts, ideas, you can go ahead and drop them in on that Padlet. And Connie, there will be a recording of this session. So if you're just joining us, not a problem. There'll be a recording. We'll send it out in the next day or two. Sometimes it takes us just a moment to edit any snippets that we need to take care of. But you will see, you will have that opportunity to watch that again. And those of you, if you have questions during today's session, please feel free to put them in the chat. We have a whole team here today that are more than happy to address any questions or concerns that pop up. So do not hesitate. So while you continue to jot down your thoughts on those EAD design challenges and the themes, continue to share your thinking there. I'm going to go ahead and keep us moving as we think about our last core document, the pedagogy companion, and those 6 core pedagogical principles. So as we think of these 6 core pedagogical principles, I think one of the aspects that is really amazing is how core principles 1, 2, and 3, excellence for all, growth mindset and capacity building, and building an EAD ready classroom and school really set the foundation of the learning environment and the dispositions in order to engage in those rigorous inquiries and practicing those skills, which we see in 4, 5, and 6. So 4, inquiry as a primary mode of learning; 5, practice of constitutional democracy and student agency; and 6, assess, reflect, and approve, making sure that we're constantly using the opportunity to gain feedback, make changes to our practice, and continue this cycle again. Understanding that when we say assess, reflect, and improve, we're not solely focusing on a summative assessment, but really thinking about where are the points of reflection and engagement throughout. And in our Pedagogy Companion, if you haven't seen it yet, what you'll gain access to for each of those core pedagogical principles, you have the what do we mean by this principle? Why does this principle matter? What is the rationale and evidence supporting this principle? And the how can EAD supporters put this idea into practice? Finally, that box right there, you'll see we have our teacher and our student moves. Now, those moves are actions and protocols and activities that both students and teachers can use to support learning when engaging with one of the principles. So you'll see that there. And today, just taking a moment to really highlight principle number 4, inquiry as a primary mode of learning. Once we start diving in with Michelle and Ashlyn, you're really going to see how we can have those inquiry and those questions and make those connections as we're diving into some primary sources, which I'm super excited and very excited to do. And as we think about what can this look like in the classroom, those teacher moves, designing lessons that uncover the complexity of an event, dynamic social group, or leading individuals, incorporating opportunities to analyze diverse forms of evidence, including images as well as text. And obviously we're going to see that today. And from our student perspective, really evaluating the strengths, weaknesses, and factualness of varied sources, thinking about how are they collecting the information that they're learning and processing and inferring, and thinking about how can they use that information, those facts that they're capturing, to really construct a written and oral argument using that evidence as a foundation. And on that note, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to introduce my wonderful friend and colleague from the Leventhal Map and Education Center, Michelle Blanc. So Michelle Blanc leads all aspects of teacher training, school programs, and curriculum development at the Map Center. She has over 20 years of experience in museums and classrooms, teaching history and designing programming for varied sources. She has a master's in public history from Northeastern alma mater, super excited, and is licensed teacher for grades 5 through 8 in Massachusetts. So on that note, I am going to turn the floor over to Michelle and really have her dive in, and I am going to just.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here. Thank you, Natasha. And I'm honored to have been invited to talk to all of you and to be in the company of all of these other amazing organizations that are part of EAD as well. So I want to talk a little bit first about my organization. So I'm going to have you move forward. And we are located inside of the Boston Public Library. And so we are a map center, one of the few who are kind of an odd animal in a way. There are not very many that do what we do. There are lots of map libraries and map collections out there, of course. You might have one locally. But in terms of spaces where that are devoted to educating through maps, we're one of the few. And also, to my knowledge, the only one in a public library. So if you have another one that I don't know about, please let me know. So if you come visit us at the library, you can visit our gallery, which we have changing exhibitions and a collection of over 200,000 historical maps and thousands of historical atlases as well. But we are also in the business of GIS, so Geographic Information Systems, and helping people to actually create maps as well to tell their stories. So my role at the library is to shepherd the K-12 education program, and we serve thousands of students every year. We're most active in the Boston Public Schools, and we teach everyone from first graders who are learning what maps are, all the way up through high school students, through our Maptivist initiative, which if I have time, I'll talk a little bit at the end, which has a very strong civics thread throughout it. And we are helping high school students, especially, to understand their city and their world. But what I want to talk about today is one of our kind of core lessons and focus, which is about mapping Indigenous presence, a story of land and maps, which is the title of our session today. And Natasha, if you could advance me. To start, because we are a map center and because we talk about place and land, you've probably encountered a land acknowledgement, either going to a theater or an event, but this is ours for the Leventhal Map Center, and we acknowledge the land of the Massachusetts, Wampanoag, Pawtucket, and Nipmuc people who lived in Greater Boston. And we acknowledge these Indigenous people, devastating effects of settler colonialism on their communities, and of course their vibrant contemporary presence. And I want to note that the work, the lessons, and things that I'm going to share today, these were all done in collaboration with Indigenous educators and scholars and cartographers who we've worked with for many years now, initially on an exhibition called America Transformed, Mapping the 19th Century. So these materials kind of evolved from that and have continued to expand and evolve as we work with them. So to begin, hopefully all of you, use maps or see them every day, have them hanging in your classroom. But we are always thinking beyond the map. That should be our slogan, but thinking about how maps are not simply about orientation, right? They are that. But one of our favorite exercises is to begin with a visual like this one of the blue marble and ask students, is this a map? And it actually can foster some really beautiful discussion, starting to think about what should go on a map, what kind of layers, is this a good map if you think it's a map? And getting down into the kind of deeper idea of the purpose behind a map and what is it that you're trying to show on it. So if you crack open your Webster's Dictionary, this is a definition you might find there, maps being selective representations of information, and then this relationship of things in one place. But these really key concepts that are important to talk about with maps, first of all, is we say selectivity in the mapping world, but choices, right? So what's been selected on your map to show you? The information and knowledge that's contained there. So whose knowledge is it? How was it collected? And is it reliable? Of course, we're all thinking about making our students good citizens and good critical thinkers. So thinking about this with maps can be a harder proposition. They often look very formal and official, and so students often tend to trust what they're seeing. And so we're always challenging students to think about the source. And then finally, this relationship of spaces and places. So there's kind of three layers that we approach here. So again, maps is orientation. Where are you? Every map you look at, I bet you try to find yourself on it. We all do it. It's a human endeavor to do that. And then next, this sort of layer of critical inquiry about purpose and audience. So what's going on with this map here? What are we trying to uncover? And then the third layer, which is more in our realm of our Maptivist initiatives, of building new knowledge and building your own knowledge through maps, but specifically mapping and creating your own maps of your space and place and social issues. So Natasha. So I wanted to start by sharing, this is a site, some of you may be familiar with it, called Native Land. It comes out of Canada. And this is a screenshot, but there is a live link, or you can use the URL that's right there on the screen. And I just wanted to ask you, and you're welcome to just drop this in the chat, just to tell me what you see here, just to observe. Tell me what you notice about this map. This is a question we would ask of our students. What do you notice right now? You can comment upon anything at all. Yeah, the colors, the beautiful colors of this map make it lovely. I'm seeing also the term overlap. Yeah, a lot of you are a plurality, overlapping shapes and colors. Oh, lovely, Ava. Roaming patterns. I like that a lot. So, starting with this map of what we can recognize that we're looking at the shape of the United States, but suddenly here is this unexpected sort of map here. This is an interactive, so if you do click around on it and zoom in to your own area of the United States, you will notice, yes, that there are the names of different indigenous nations on this map. I love pockets of people. I love that. These are great. This is like poetry. So, this is a really wonderful tool to start with to sort of, again, any map that can kind of whack us out of our usual scenario. We could talk about map projections another time, but thinking about what are we expecting to see and what do we see here on this map. So these overlapping areas of Indigenous presence. So Natasha, if you could advance us. Unfortunately, most of our texts, not most, well, I can't speak for all of them, but many textbooks, certainly the ones that I grew up with, will show you something more like this. This is a contemporarily made map showing the territorial acquisitions of the major European powers. Everything from the Louisiana Purchase to the original 13 colonies, or the British Empire giving the land over to the new United States after the American Revolution. But nowhere on this map do we see what we just saw in the previous slide, this overlap, this presence of Indigenous people on this land. So students seeing only a map like this one are only seeing the land as this commodity, this land as being fought over as for power across North America. So my challenge to you, I am presenting you with a map. This is not one in our collections. It's actually a part of the collections of the National Archives. It's not one that's easily available on their site, but it is. There is a slide of it in a kind of JPEG link in the lesson that is shared with you today. So I want to ask you, I'm going to give you kind of a minimal introduction to this map. It was made by an individual named Nachaninga. And this map was made in the 1830s. And what I would like you to do now, there is a Padlet that is on your site, and Natasha may pop that up for us in a little bit. You have a couple of options here. If you want to go old school, which is what we do usually when we're in person with students and also with teachers, you can just grab a piece of scrap paper and a pencil or pen. But you can also just take a screenshot of a section and then drop it into the Padlet. But either way, we'd like you to add to the Padlet. And my question to you right now is my directive to you, I should say, is to just kind of look from end to end of this map, corner to corner, and find a section that you find interesting, like visually interesting or interesting for any reason at all. And to either sketch it quickly or to take a screenshot of it. And as you're doing that, I want you to also imagine we have this individual, Nachaninga, our map maker, here with us on our Zoom, and to ask you what questions you would ask Nachaninga about his map, because we don't have a lot of information about it at the moment. So I'm going to give you a moment to do that, to sketch, to snip, and to think about questions that you would like to ask Nachaninga. And Pamela comments that it looks like a stick map from Malaysia. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm going to give you another minute or so to sketch, to snip. I know this is fast. and to think about your questions.
While you are snipping and taking observations, I will say this is definitely one of the ways I love to analyze a map when we're in a virtual setting, really giving that opportunity to look closely, take a screenshot, pull it in. So those of you who are accepting the challenge, great job.
All right, I'm gonna look. Is it possible to put our Padlet up for us? I know that's a lot of screens. Natasha is a master at this, by the way, I think. All right, lovely. Oh, look. Okay, so some of you have zoned in on the circles here. So we have some conjecture. I know everybody likes to go towards that. It's hard to like just sort of ask questions, right? But there's someone has zoned in on the wording in the lower corner. Some guessing about maybe river transportation, wondering about the circles and branches. I love that you say branches. A lot of the students will say it looks like a leaf, the patterns on a leaf. Questions about the dots, absolutely. Oh, question mark for journeys. I see a line with circles, might be providing trees or huts, circles and branches, straight lines. I see a lot going on. The challenges of this map. Yes, there is a lot going on. So it is really hard, right, to put that out there and not know what you're looking at. But it actually is very effective with students. They really do look closely and have a lot of the same questions that you do. So good job on that. You have the minds of good, curious children, which is always a good thing in my mind. So Natasha could you advance us one more? Actually, stay right. I'm sorry. Let's back up for just a second. All right. So just to start introducing this map a little bit more, actually, I'm going to have you advance. I lied. The next slide has our map creator. So this is Nachaninga. And he is a chief of the Bahoje or Iowa tribe. And what you are looking at here is a map that was created to be brought to a U.S. government council in Washington, D.C. So some of you were asking about those lines, and you had some ideas. And those of you who are thinking that you're looking at waterways, you were right on. There is some question though, like we don't have a good sense of the scale on this map, which is one of the challenges of it, right? It's kind of unclear to us exactly how much land we're looking at. Did any of you have ideas about the circles? You can drop it in the chat if you want. Circles or dots, were there any sort of guesses on what you had there? Crops, yeah. So could be some farming, villages, family groups, yeah. So some of these visual strategies, right, are things that we know, sort of the basics of visualizing places and things, water sources, yeah. So you are in fact looking at it's an entire watershed. So I can't quite point, but the largest line in the middle there is in fact the Mississippi River. And then the second largest sort of straight line up the left side of the map is the Missouri River. So we're looking at about 250,000 square miles of space, and I'll show you a better look at that in a moment. The dotted circles are in fact villages, so those represent communities, people. The empty circles are always like a mystery, right? But they are lakes, actually. So you're looking at sort of on the right side, there's a bunch of little empty circles, and that's a lake, a system of lakes. So this map really extends basically from Green Bay to Minneapolis and then down the Mississippi River. So it's a huge area. The story and the lines, the dotted lines are pathways, but they're also, what's really amazing about this map is that it is not only a geographic map showing a place, but it's also a timeline. It's showing the history of the Iowa people on this land over 400 years, and basically from their origin up at the Green Bay, sort of moving over time, but also their movements during the seasons, kind of moving between settled farming in the warmer seasons up to maple syruping up north in the springtime, for example, hunting grounds. So it's a really rich, very intricate document that's full of history. And the map was made to prove that the Iowa people had been on this land. This was their ancestral land. The land had their names on it and their name, Iowa, right? Iowa. And the Iowa people were in contest with the Sac and Fox tribes to prove who had the right to remain on this land. It was basically a matter of the government trying to get the Iowa to sign yet another treaty to be removed once again from more and more of their land. Despite proving and despite even the committee kind of agreeing, yes, you've been here for a very long time, they did not win this particular battle in DC. It was the Sac and the Fox were given different pieces of that land. And if we look at this next slide, you can kind of see this is the area we're looking at here on this late 18th century map, so that enormous swath of land. And the Iowa people, I'm sorry, here's another diagram, sort of kind of thinking too about how, ideas of shared land, right? So it differs across, of course, the huge variety of native cultures, but in many cases, there are sort of fixed villages, maybe crops and fields on the outside, and often very sort of fixed, fairly fixed, but often negotiated and shared hunting grounds. So from that earlier map, thinking about the overlap of Native people sharing those sort of realms. So this is the result of that. So Natasha, you might have to click it like 4 times, but here's that land again. And this small green area here is where the Iowa were removed to on the Kansas-Nebraska border. So there are actually 2 Iowa reservations, but this is the main one that from this large 250,000 square mile area to this much smaller space. So this is just one story that's particularly compelling. Maybe some of you live in this part of the country, so this map may also kind of get some conversation about, what happened, who was here, what happened with these treaties with the Iowa tribe. And when we look at maps like this, that story is not there, right? Even from sort of a visual sense of thinking about the lines and the curves and the interconnections and the overlap, and understandings of how intertwined culture and land are for Native people, this map, this is just sort of the kind of map we might look at when we talk about the land of the United States. So I want to challenge students to always think about, like, all right, so whose story are we telling on this map? So this is a map from the early 20th century of the United States. And if you compare this one to our earlier map and ask you once again, what do you notice here? And if we advance it even a little bit more, we can see a close-up of the same area with the native land map. So what do you notice about the map on the left compared to the other native land map? Just from a visual sense. Yeah, so the geometric blockiness, the squareness of the map. Yeah, geometric borders. So this map on the left being now laid out with the US government's survey system, these rigid boundaries, right? The lack of fluidity. So if you could, this map is linked in the lesson, but you can also use this to start talking about US imperialism, because we also have the Philippines and Alaska and Cuba on this map on the edges as well. So what's been, as westward expansion has so-called, been completed. Now the U.S. is kind of expanding out of its borders into other parts of the world as well. So just from that visual sense, in the lesson, you would go forward and look at this map and then also talk about these as a pair too. Since our time is short, we'll move on. And then finally, this map showing the removal of Native people. It's a list showing not only in red Native reservations, but also they're listed as Indian boarding schools on here and reservation schools. So thinking about sort of Nachaninga's map, the native land map, and then how this map shows Native people. And one of the goals of our lesson in doing this work is to ask students, like, where do you see Indigenous presence on maps? And there's a rich, huge amount of maps that do show Native presence, how they are shown, how they are visualized. So you could look at maps of the early colonies all the way through westward expansion and ask students to consider, what are the differences here? Who's doing the telling and where are the Native people on these maps, and start to unfold that conversation. So I want to also highlight, talking about land through the eyes of Native people. And we've seen the Bohojé map, but there really are not a huge number of historical maps by Native people. There's several examples, but maps on printed paper were not a traditional way that Native people sort of, understood their land, and they mapped it in very complex ways, but they did not put it on printed paper. Sometimes it was ephemeral, sometimes oral tradition, really complex understandings of space and land, but just not on these printed papers. But that does not mean that there are many interesting and amazing Native cartographers working who are kind of thinking about this and sort of reclaiming not only the land, but cartography for themselves. So this is one example. Elizabeth James Perry is a Quina Wampanoag in our neck of the woods, and she created this lovely bare map of New England called the Decolonized Map of New England, that shows only Native place names on this map. So it challenges students to, where are many of the names they know, but where are the ones that they are missing from this map, and starts to say, like, I know all of these names. They're ones that I see every day, and what do they mean? Margaret Pierce is a Potawatomi cartographer based in Maine. She created, along with years of working with First Nations in Canada, she's also done maps of in Maine showing Indigenous place names. So these very intricate understandings of, again, nooks and crannies of coastlines, and really bringing in Native knowledge in their languages and names to help people understand the land. And then Aaron Carapella is Cherokee descent. He's created, you can buy these maps. He has a ton of different varieties, including this one of proposed pipelines on tribal homelands as well. So those are some, if you're looking for examples for your classroom to have as the sort of counterweight to other maps of the US, these are really amazing examples. And again, the authorship of the map is very important. So who's doing the telling? So I just want to highlight, this is a way of bringing in this idea of landscape and change over time, but also modern presence, right? This is a very long quote, but I've kind of highlighted the end of this idea of the Indianized landscape and how we can reimagine and extend it, enhance it. And that's part of our shared citizenship and our obligation to acknowledge not only whose land we're on, but also the Native people who are all around us today, who may not be living only on reservations, but are part of our communities. So what are the conversations that we need to have? And especially as we talk about environmental justice and climate change, how Native people have stewarded the land for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And so how can we sort of bring together these ideas across our curriculums? So we talk with students again about, our local, like, this isn't just Native people who live far away, but if you live in Northern California or Washington or Oregon, excuse me, you may know the Klamath River and a lot of the years, decades and decades long battle to take down the dams to let the salmon run upstream again. And a lot of the tribes there working on cultural burning to keep wildfires from spreading and being as deadly as they have been over the last decade. Standing Rock, for example, being an example to talk about with students about civil action and issues, and of course, land back movements of Native peoples across the country. So this is kind of how we end our discussion with students. And the lesson I just wanted to highlight, it is on the site. Maybe it could get dropped quickly into the chat as well. But our lesson includes the Iowa map overview exercise and comparing it with other maps. And then you can also bring in maps from our collection. There's some inquiry forms using Google Forms that you can actually create yourself, and all the questions are there to ask students to interrogate the maps and look for Native presence on them, and then use them as a discussion point with students to kind of go through the evolution. So that is available to you as well. So I'm going to stop there. I know my time is up, and just to ask you to kind of think about your own connections to maps and mapping. Maybe many of you teach Indigenous issues and history, and I'll let Natasha take it from here. But I want to thank you all for listening and for being here and participating today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Michelle. You were absolutely amazing. I think one of the aspects that I really love is the depth with all of the maps and the layering of the map and different types of maps. And I think that's how the story gets more complex. And we see all of these narratives that are all part of our history, and thinking about how we continue to incorporate them. And so what I'd love for you to do before we transfer over to Ashlyn, I'd love for you to take a moment and do a little bit of a stop and think about how can the work of the Leventhal Map and Education Center deepen student learning in your current setting. Okay, and you'll see the resources. I know there's some questions around some of the lessons above, so you'll see those right underneath that little button. If you press that button, that's going to take you to the Map and Education Center. And while you're stopping and thinking, I will say, definitely go and explore the amazing collections of maps at the center. You can click down to the grain of the map, and I always laugh because this is one of my favorite things. But as you're exploring maps with students and empowering them to look closer and to really create questions and spark some of that inquiry, being able to get to that granular level makes such a difference. Think about those of you who zoomed in on our earlier map and were able to pick out just the circles or just the lines to really capture. And so I will leave this Padlet here for you. You can share your thoughts, ideas. How can you see this connecting with the work that you're doing? Thinking about, yes, this was one narrative, as Michelle shared, this was one narrative that we see, and thinking about how we can use maps and layer on the complexity with other topics that we see and engage with throughout history. And so while you are thinking, processing, I'll give you a moment. We always know that it's a lot of information to kind of take in and to understand, but taking the time to stop and think, how can it actually become applicable to the work that you're doing in the classroom, giving yourself that tangible connection so that when you leave us today, I mean, we only have you till 8:30, but when you leave us today and you go into your classrooms tomorrow, really thinking about what you can bring in and how you start to spark that depth inquiry, the importance of perspective into the work that you're doing. And while you are thinking and processing there, I'm going to keep us moving because we do want to make sure that we have time for breakout rooms at the end. And overlaying maps, as Michelle said, is amazing. The systems, the tools. We could talk about maps all day. Okay, so as I move us along, we're going to go ahead and shift and continue to shift our brain to think about the EAD roadmap in the classroom. So Michelle did an amazing job taking us through a lesson, having us think in depth and really modeling how we could do that in the classroom. And as you know, with the EAD roadmap, we have our website. You can download the roadmap itself, you can download the report, but you also have the opportunity to engage with the interactive roadmap. That's a great spot if you just want to start toggling through and just exploring what are some of the questions there. And you see, as you think about those driving questions we looked at earlier today, and how those could connect in concepts that were really reflected in the lesson that Michelle shared. And within that, we also have an educator resource collection. I'm going to share a few of the resources after Ashlyn shares her wonderful thinking around incorporating maps today. But just know that those educator resources are there for you. You can search them by theme. So you can go ahead, click on theme number 2, and all of the resources that align to theme number 2 will pop up, just giving you even more resources to think more in depth. And I am so pleased to welcome Ashlyn Crossfield. So excited to have her here today with us. So she is a 9th grade history teacher at the O'Brien School of Mathematics and Science in Roxbury, Massachusetts. She received her bachelor's in sociology from Boston University and master's in education from Boston College, where she was also a Donovan Urban Teaching Scholar. She's been a classroom teacher for almost 6 years and is really dedicated to teaching through a lens of social justice while helping students make personal connections to history and work to reach their full academic potential. So we're so excited to have Ashlyn here today. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself again and just click through slides. And
hi, everyone. It is good to be here. Thank you, Natasha. And thank you, Michelle, for setting me up because a lot of resources that I have and just general questions that I have to present to you all, it was based off of my work that I actually did with Michelle this summer in the Leventhal Center. So I think it will be a nice, be able to make some connections there. So some questions that I usually use in my classroom to help guide student analysis, and these questions can be used across the board. These can be used with primary source documents. This can be used with a lot of different things that you're analyzing, because it helps students see the basis and then dig a little bit deeper into analytical questions. And Michelle mentioned some of these already. So really getting behind who the author is, and who the map maker is and what was their purpose in creating this. So this could lead to other inquiries about point of view and perspective, which I think is really important, especially when you're trying to get students to think about the bigger picture, think about what information are they receiving and who are they receiving it from. So getting them to really think critically. So this is all part of context building, and also looking at who is the audience but that the author is targeting. So who do they think that this map is being made for? And when was this map created? And how might that have affected the author's purpose? So especially in history classes, it's important to build context around historical time periods. So how might the time period in which the author was creating this map affected how they see the map? So over time, you see that maps have changed. We're coming from where a world that some people thought the earth was flat, right? And then eventually we learned that it's round. So obviously that's going to change how certain things look over time. So getting them to look at time period. And then when you get a little bit deeper, so what do you see, like surface level, having point out little details like Michelle just did with you all, and looking at that map and how some of you zoomed in and really encouraging them to pull out the details. One thing I've been saying in my classroom recently is saying that nothing's too obvious, like point out the obvious details, because even looking at the maps where you can see native borders and indigenous names, a lot of people just pointed out colors, like, yes, so what do these colors mean? And having students just point out, like, what do they see that's obvious, right? And also, what do we think is left out? Like having them think the other side of the story. What might they not be seeing? Which this one, and I'll get into this in a little bit. This one might take a little bit of time for students to pull that out, because it requires a level of thinking where they're thinking about it's kind of dual thinking. So thinking about what is there, but also what is not there. And then when you're comparing maps, like we just did, what are some similarities and differences you see here? It could be a map of the same area, but what are some similarities you see in how the map is being presented? And this could also help to have students look at each map individually before you have them look at it together. So those are just some things that you can use probably across the board. So there's different places where you can use maps, and this could be across disciplines, but some examples is you can use it to look at economics, obviously geography, sociology, so you can look at demographics of certain areas, government, so you can look at how certain places approach politics in certain areas, and just again looking at statistics behind those areas. So the main focus for my classroom this year is just to use maps to amplify different voices and challenge ideas throughout history, because like I said before, a lot has changed. So it's important to have students acknowledge what has exactly changed. So usually at the beginning of the year, when we start looking at maps, aside from pointing out geographic locations, we look at the different maps that we often see, and comparing what these maps are showing. So sometimes when we look at maps, we see maps that look like more so on the one on the right. So we have a traditional Mercator projection map. And the one on the left, what we have is a Galt-Peters map, where we're looking at one map that's compromising size and then one map's compromising shape. And this means a lot of things. So we have to question accuracy for maps, and we also have to question what exactly is the purpose of the map. If the purpose of the map is to get from point A to point B, then we might want to use the one on the right. If the purpose of the map to find out true size, which we're going to look at what that means in a second, then we might want to go to the one on the left. So there is a link to a map that I normally like to use that Natasha is going to bring up, that is going to take us to a site that is really helpful to have students kind of poke around and have fun looking at how different countries of the world fit on other sizes in other countries and other continents. So when you pull up this website, they can poke around themselves, or you can pull it up on the screen and then you can see, for example, if you have the United States in blue, and you can put it over, okay, it's generally the size, it's a little bit smaller than the size of Brazil if we're looking at it. And then if you pull it over to somewhere, for example, over Australia, right? So those sizes are a little bit comparable. But if you look at it in the map, you might think that it's bigger than it actually is in reality. So it helps. This is where it could come into play with geography, and where it could be really helpful to understand size versus shape. Where in this map, we can see that the shape is intact, but as soon as you start moving the different countries that, and you can really click on any country or look it up, you can see where size may be distorted. But you can go over here. Yes, for example, right? This is probably where you can see the bigger difference, right? So you have a country like India, as large as it is on this map, it may not look that big, right? So if you drag it up to Greenland, somewhere that it looks larger, but we can see that in reality, India is quite larger. And there's a few different reasons for that, even in terms of looking at a flat map versus something like an actual globe. So this is definitely a good resource if you like to have students just kind of poke around and write down what they see. So going throughout the year, after we've kind of laid the groundwork for what maps show and how to be critical of who is showing the map, I like to ask some deeper analytical questions, especially when we start comparisons. So, for example, this is something that we have done a little bit more recently. We did it around January. So just so you know, like the scope of what we do throughout the year, we start with some surface level questions. So just what do you see? What do you think has changed over time? But then we get into how does this affect the people that we don't necessarily see on the map? So how does this affect, for example, Indigenous peoples as we look at these? So one question we asked is like, when we think of the US today, we might think of a map like this one, like Michelle showed us earlier as well. What kind of information does it show? And then some students might pull out the fact that we see state borders, we might see rivers, we might see state names, cities, and so on and so forth. And what do you notice about how the states are divided up? Students might say. So we see these lines, some are crooked, some are straight. We can see that they are divided up in based off of distance and just a few different responses. And then this last question asked them to dig a little bit deeper. So what might this say about what the US values? So one example of a student response here is, the borders are very pronounced, showing that we value land and space more than anything. Wars and bloodshed have been caused over international borders, and this map highlights the importance of them. So this student, and mind you, this is only one student response out of many. So when we're looking at these, I want you to keep in mind that the level of analysis is different for many different students and also for the time of the year that we're talking about it. So the student is really looking at the fact that one, pulling on information where we've talked about conflict over land and borders recently, and using that to analyze what the United States might value in terms of looking at this map. The second one looks at a map that shows Native nations in South Carolina. So again, asking the same question, but asking it about a different group of people. So looking at Native Americans in this area. So the student mentions that this map shows that groups that lived on the land in the past, leading them together, as well as other pictures probably labeling things. It shows that Natives cared more about what the land that they lived on and was about more than the power, because groups are barely precise, they're literal circles, and there's no fences or borders. So the student is also looking at borders, but looking at it in a different sense. So looking at it as the fact that they cared more about the land rather than dividing up their people. So again, just looking at a little bit of a deeper level of analysis here. And then pulling everything together, looking at this Native versus European perspective on this land, how might that have impacted Native land? How might this colonialism or colonization of land impacted it? And the student looks at the Native land has been modified to suit the American standpoint of ownership and borders, the use and worth of land. The names of rich people are all symbolisms of this. They include things on the Native maps, like the shape of a black bear to represent wildlife, and names of many places are spiritual. So when it's mentioning the bear, it's actually the same map that Michelle just showed, the map of decolonized New England. So everything really connects here. So 3 different student responses, 3 different levels of analysis, but just an example of what kind of questions you could ask in the classroom. And so this slide, I just really wanted to emphasize the fact that you will not always get high levels of analysis or even effort for every single map that you look at. So we have one student looking at these maps obviously the requirement is at least 2 to 3 sentences. but you can see it's either barely a sentence for each one. So what do you notice? There are a lot of treaties made. So the website that is referring to, and Natasha just put in, and the website that it will take you to is a map of the United States, but also it's showing how different areas were divided up in terms of placing Indigenous peoples on reservations, or how was the land removed from them by a treaty or otherwise, and when that happened. So this student is just pointing out, okay, there were a lot of treaties made, and then looking at that they were colonized early. This student digs a little bit deeper. So for example, the third question asks about, does it prioritize Native or colonist perspective? They said that it prioritizes both perspectives because it shows when both groups obtained land throughout time. But the only issue is that it might be based off of data given by the colonists, and not natives. So the information could be inaccurate and misleading. So just, again, it digs a little bit deeper into thinking what is the reasoning and who is the one making the map. And that's just side by side if you would like to read a little bit more into those. And this is just, I won't read this entire response, but this is just an example of what you could use as like a summative evaluation. So either an exit ticket or have a longer essay. So evaluate the extent to which maps are used to influence colonization. So just having them use evidence from what they've already looked at to expand on what they know. So just a few tips. I'm just going to reiterate some of what I've already said. Don't be afraid of repetition. It might be a lot to repeat the same questions for each map that you look at, but it's good. It helps students think about these prompts when they're no longer there, especially if you're thinking about exams towards the end of the year and you want them to provide enough information. It's good to look at the same place and provide multiple perspectives on those places. And there's a lot of resources available. Michelle shared a whole bunch and there's more to come. It's good to use anything that's on the internet, but sometimes old-fashioned projects where they're using their hands and putting things on paper, anything to get them really like engaged in looking at the maps and building some of their own. And like I mentioned before, level of analysis always varies for a number of reasons. You know, sometimes it could be anything from exhaustion to just general circumstances that are going on that varies their level of analysis. But it is good to have mixed pairs, meaning students either with different abilities or just having whole class discussions where everyone is able to speak so that they can hear each other's thoughts. And also just, you know, be patient. So beginning of the year always looks different from the end of the year, as I'm sure you all know. So it's definitely, sometimes it takes time and it's not always the same, but it's worth it in the end to hear some of their responses.
Ashlyn, thank you for all of those tidbits and for your thinking and showing that student work. I think it's amazing to see kind of the evolution of student thinking as students become more familiar with maps and map analysis and thinking about how maps aren't just a here I am situation, but where we can see the changing landscapes over time, really connecting back to that theme number 2. And so what I would love you to do now is actually take a moment and think about your discussion with Ashlyn and think about what are some concepts or ideas that really resonated. I know something that stuck with me was, I put it in the chat earlier as I'm scrolling through, but nothing is too obvious. I think sometimes we worry that we're not, and our students worry that they're not picking the most critical aspect, but having them understand that every single component is essential in the understanding of the map. So take a moment, stop and think, what was just a great reminder? What did you appreciate seeing from the student work and seeing the student engagement and seeing the variety? I think that's something also, as we think about educating for American democracy and the roadmap and the questions and the concept of inquiry is hard and it takes time. So I really appreciate, Ashlyn, as you were saying, that this is not something that's going to happen overnight, right? This takes time, it takes practice, it takes that repetition and that cadence so that students start to become those detectives and really investigate those maps and ask those essential questions. So as you go ahead, I'm going to give you a moment to go ahead, share those reflections. As you're sharing, I'm going to kind of go through a few more recent resources that are on the EAD website. And before we break into small groups, don't worry, those of you who've been with us, we save time for small groups today. We're going to do it. But as I mentioned before, there is an amazing collection of resources. So yes, we have those tidbits that Michelle and Ashlyn shared with us this evening. And if you go on the Educating for American Democracy website, you'll find our collection of educator resources there, all reviewed and vetted by our educator task force. But we have, so here's another resource from the Leventhal Map Center. We also have the resources go across K-12. So if you're thinking about your youngest learners, we have some resources from Kid Citizen, a bird's eye view, wandering with maps. Thinking of early encounters in Native New York, did Native people really sell Manhattan? So here we see these inquiries and these questions being posed so that students are grappling with these complicated and robust topics. Oops, as I clicked way too fast, there we go. And a deliberation guide, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So as we think about these resources, thinking about how they're showing different ways to really engage with this topic and thinking and engaging with this concept of how change is happening over time, and how, notice how we didn't just talk about the entire narrative of the United States, but picked a story and really went in depth. When we think about inquiry, that's what ends up happening. You find something and you go in more depth in order to engage. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put us in breakout rooms for 10 minutes. In your breakout rooms, what I would love for you to do is have a conversation. I'm going to go, there we go. Have a conversation in terms of, what are you noticing? Okay, what are you thinking? What are the opportunities to really bring that deeper student learning around our changing landscapes into your classroom by using maps, and also just in general, how you can talk about that tension that we see happening. So on that note, I'm going to put us into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and close it out. And those of you who are popping off now, don't forget there is the exit ticket, and that's what will give us our trigger to send you the letter, your email, just saying that you have participated today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen there, and let's open up some breakout rooms. I'm going to, there we go, and have a great conversation, everybody. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I know it's always a sprint. I popped into a room that ended up being a Minnesota room. Both of the educators in that room were from Minnesota, so that was kind of cool. But I really appreciate you taking the time, having a conversation, and just continuing to share resources, share ideas, and think about how we bring this back into the classroom. And really making this practical. So in our last few minutes today, I'm going to close us out and make sure you get out of here on time today. So while I'm closing out, I definitely recommend you can work on your exit ticket while I'm talking. I can just be like the little background noise in your ear while I'm clicking through, but definitely go ahead, take these next couple of minutes to do that exit ticket and really think about what you came in with, what you're leaving with, and how you're going to bring it tomorrow, what you're going to bring back with you to the classroom tomorrow. So just a reminder of our goals, and this is why it's so important to have all of us engage in this learning together, thinking about 60 million students, 100,000 schools, and 1 million teachers, really engaging in this rigorous and robust history and civics education. And when we think about that, that's saying everyone, making sure that we're not just saving a rich and rigorous history and civic education for that AP level, but this is everyone across K-12. So really, we appreciate you engaging in the conversation today. And thinking about what action steps can you take? Okay, this is always the, okay, I went to this great PD, I heard these amazing resources, what do I do now? Really thinking about how you can share the roadmap with your network, colleagues, school leaders, community leaders, diving in and exploring the resources. So either on the Educating for American Democracy website, that resource collection, or heading out and browsing the Leventhal collection, And how are we continuing this dialogue? Really thinking about attending future workshops. So next week, not next week, in March, we have our next session. Let's get there. There we go. Balancing the aspirations and tensions of we, the people of the United States. So that will be our next session in March. I hope you come back and join us again. We're so excited to continue these conversations, and just ending today with a huge thank you. Thank you to Michelle and Ashlyn for sharing your expertise, your resources, and really having us think about how we can actually bring this back to the classroom, engage in these rich conversations around our changing landscapes, and help our students really grapple with these complex topics. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because it's always nice to see a face at the end of the session, not the screen in the slide deck. But I really appreciate all of you coming this evening, engaging the conversation with us, sharing your thoughts and ideas. And I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and I hope you join us for the next session. So thank you again to Michelle and Ashlyn, and everyone have a wonderful afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. But hopefully we'll see you next time. After you finish the exit ticket, go ahead and pop off. Have a good night, everybody.